Welcome back. Those of you who were with us before the break will remember that we had some difficulty with the sound from the Minister of Mauritania. We think we've resolved that, and we will play that at the end of this group of presentations. But first we go to Mr. Chris Lyons, who is Head of External Engagement at UK ECTIS. Chris, welcome.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you very much to the Middle East Education Thought Leadership Forum. It's a privilege to be here today on behalf of UK ECTIS Limited. I'm going to be talking with you all for the next 28 minutes or so. And the theme for today is on the pandemic, pressures and pathways to recognition. As David has said, my name is Chris Lyons. I head up external engagement at UK ECTIS Limited. I've been at the organisation now for 14 years, built up some interesting experience and gained some insights into the world of education, recognition, institutions and qualifications during this time. You've got my Twitter handle and email contact details on screen if anyone wants to pick up the conversation with me at any point in the future. Do feel free to drop me a line or tweet me. Okay, so what am I going to cover today? 5 principal things that I'm going to be looking through. Firstly, to explore recognition and that within the context of the Lisbon Recognition Convention, and discussing briefly concepts of fairness and transparency and exploring what this means in real terms. Secondly, then, I'll speak a little bit about the organisation that I work for, UK ENIC, and how that fits in with the Lisbon Recognition Convention and how we operate as a national recognition agency. We'll then move on to some of the core work that we're involved in, which centres around qualification evaluations, and we will see how recognition fits within that particular area of our work. We'll then proceed on to COVID and consider the challenges that have been presented by the global pandemic of the past 2 years or so now, and how that in particular has affected the education sphere. And they will be reflecting in the process on how we as a national agency have been able to respond to that, whilst also looking at how different countries and different organisations have dealt with the pandemic too. Okay, so the story all starts with Lisbon, and the Lisbon Recognition Convention is essentially a Council of Europe initiative that was started some time ago now in the mid-90s with a focus on making mobility of students easier and providing essentially a pathway through which students, learners, qualification holders from one country should not encounter any unfair barriers when trying to access another country for further study or indeed for work. So with Lisbon, the National Recognition Information Centre for the UK was set up. And this happened in 1997 when the UK signed what is known as the Lisbon Recognition Convention. Its long title being the Convention on the Recognition of Qualifications Concerning Higher Education in the European region. Lisbon is a little bit catchier, I'm sure you'll agree. And Lisbon, as a convention, sets out the role that an ENIC-NARIC centre should play, the services that it needs to provide and make available, and the information that centre then needs to offer with regard to its country's own system. So, in effect, Lisbon is enshrined within the ENIC function, and the ENIC-NARIC Centre ensures that a fair and transparent method for assessing and advising on international qualifications can be achieved. And through a convention, there are an agreed set of guidelines and recommendations that each signatory country has to follow. Lisbon also specifies then the role of the network of ENIC, NARIC centres. UK ENIC is the UK's national agency for providing recognition of international qualifications. And we work under government contract through the Department for Education. So we're not within the government. We provide a service on behalf of the government. At our core, we offer information to a variety of different stakeholders regarding global academic, vocational, and professional qualifications. We offer advice on their comparable levels. And by comparable, we're looking in terms of the UK education system. And by comparable, we're looking for indicators of similarities between qualifications as opposed to exact equivalency. This service, or these services rather, are provided on an individual basis to individuals presenting us with their credentials, their qualifications, looking to work, to study, or live in the UK, for example, or else to members, to stakeholders, not just across the UK, but elsewhere around the world, who are presented with individual credentials and they wish to understand their meaning, their comparability, and their status. We were established as UK NARIC, so many of you may know us initially as UK NARIC, and we were set up, as I say, in '97 when the UK signed the Lisbon Recognition Convention. Our name changed earlier this year to UK ENIC when the United Kingdom formally left the European Union. The ENIC contract is run by Ectis Limited. That's a private limited company, and we've been doing this since 1997. So UK ENIC is closely involved with a great number of different stakeholders across the UK and beyond, and we're involved in engaging, advising and guiding a wide range of different parties. As you can see, in terms of our reach, in terms of our members, in terms of the people who rely on our services and information, we advise and have members from the higher education, university sector, from further education colleges, professional bodies that oversee different professions within the UK, a variety of different employers, careers and advice on work placements. And we also engage ever increasingly with agencies overseas and government departments overseas. So whilst our core function is one that is centered in the UK as the UK national agency, we now actually have members from 60 plus countries, I believe, and the membership split is 2/3 UK based and 1/3 in the rest of the world. So we have a wide reach and a diversity of interests, as you can see from the different bodies that come to us, all looking in some way, shape or form to relate back to understanding qualifications and the recognition of qualifications better. So at our core, we deal with evaluating qualifications. And we receive inquiries all the time about all sorts of different types of qualifications from all over the world. The qualifications that we receive are evaluated, and this is done in accordance with the recognition criteria and principles of the Lisbon Recognition Convention. I talked earlier about the need for fairness in the evaluations and transparency in the approach. And on our website, we set out exactly how it is we approach the evaluation of qualifications through our evaluation criteria. The fairness element that is enshrined within Lisbon dictates that there should be no unreasonable barrier placed or set up against individuals who hold qualifications that might prevent them from further progress in study or work within another country. One of the ways in which we approach the evaluations is to refer also to our band framework. This is a core part of the methodology that we use to evaluate international awards. And we use the band framework, which is like a large qualifications framework, if you will, that categorizes international awards by type, looking at academic awards, vocational awards, technical and occupational qualifications. And we then compare those qualifications to the most suitable qualification type in the UK, along with the framework level from the UK. So it's quite a complicated process evaluating qualifications, but we apply the same methodology for consistency and transparency. And with time, with receipt of so many new and different qualifications, our methodology continues to evolve and continues to respond to the challenges that are posed by the new qualifications that emerge. This slide just demonstrates how our band framework can work. It has 16 levels, starting at the entry level through to level 15. And actually the device of the band framework can be used to reference qualifications from one country to those qualifications from another country. So the framework then acts as a translation interpreting device. Qualifications can be related to levels on the band framework. And so if we can identify the appropriate level of a qualification from one country, we should then be able to identify those qualifications that exist in another country that we relate to the same band framework level. Again, the band framework has existed since the early 2000s. It has evolved and it has gone through a number of different iterations as it develops and as we respond to the changes that are taking place within the educational sphere. So we provide our members with lots of different services enshrined, I guess, within the core drive to provide information as it is needed, as it provides solutions, as it answers questions that are closest to the needs of our particular members. The principal database that we offer access to our members to is known as International Comparisons. And you can see on screen a clip that is taken from the login portal for ECDIS members, and that gives them access to international comparisons. This is an encyclopedic database of 210 plus countries. So we provide information on country education systems, schooling, higher education, vocational education, information around the quality assurance and accreditation that takes place in a given country, the existence of qualifications frameworks, typical grading systems that are used. And we also provide a list of the recognized institutions that operate in the higher education area for a given country. Recognized institutions in the sense that they are entitled to operate as a higher education institution for that particular country. We also offer a grade comparisons database, which I'm going to talk to you a little bit about later on. And this contains 140 plus countries, and it offers a very quick insight into how you can compare student performance in one country to student performances in another. More about that a little later. We also offer a lot of information these days on transnational education profiles. Transnational education is certainly a big buzzword within the world of education and certainly within the sphere of recognition. We offer insight into different practices as these vary considerably from country to country. And we look from the perspective of TNE sender countries and also TNE host countries. So both from the perspective of how TNE is sent out and maybe also how it is received and hosted. So we provide a wide range of information to our members. We also offer bespoke benchmarking services. This is more within the consultative area of ECDIS. And the principle behind our benchmarking services is if we're given a particular qualification, that we're able to compare that qualification to a determined level elsewhere. So on screen, what we can see in the graphic are some of the core underlying features, criteria, if you like, of our evaluation process. It is learning outcomes centric. That means the focus on what a student is able to do and achieve at the completion of their qualification. So everything relates to this as the major indicator, the learning outcome. We also take into account a number of different factors when we reach our decisions. And this starts with the entry requirements. So what is a student required to do when they start a particular program? How long is it that they study for? What is the structure of the program that they're doing? And what is the curriculum? What is the content that students will be learning? How does learning take place? Is it face-to-face? Is it in lecture hall theatres? Is it online? Is it one-to-one? Is it practical? How are the different modes of learning made up to deliver the particular program? If we look at the curriculum, we consider how the course is taught. We then have to then focus on assessment. So what are the ways in which student knowledge is tested and assessed? And then tied in with the learning outcomes, are there any associated outcomes? So in other words, does the qualification provide access to a further level of learning within a sphere of education, or does it provide professional rights for the individual? So the core components that we talk about help situate the qualification. The learning outcomes tell us what the individual is capable of doing upon completion. So in a nutshell, the service of benchmarking provides an overall judgment on the comparability, again, comparability rather than equivalence of one qualification against an identified reference point. Okay, so that was a little bit about the services and solutions that we provide. How has UK ENIC and ECDIS responded over the last couple of years in the face of the global pandemic? The global pandemic, which will have challenged severely the operations of many of our members, not the least of which are the institutions that are enrolled in UK ENIC membership. So I'm now going to explore over the next few slides the different ways in which we as an organization have helped. The first thing that we did in the middle of March last year was to establish a blog. And the intention behind the blog was to provide a rolling news update, if you like, on the impact of COVID-19 as and when it was happening. So it charts the impact that the pandemic has had in terms of closures to schools, the effect that it has had on examinations and assessments throughout the whole world. And this focus then helps to give the sorts of information that UK admissions and recruitment departments are looking for when trying to make their decisions. The blog is still available online. It is free to access. It's not just for members, it's for anybody who goes onto our website to access. And even now, we're still updating on the ever-changing, ongoing consequences of the pandemic. We explore within the blog itself how that pandemic has affected delivery of education across the world. And we can see a screenshot there taken from the middle of October last year, just to demonstrate the effect and the disruption caused to education delivery. And absolutely crazy to think that at one stage in early April 2020, up to 193 countries had completely closed their schools to their school-going students. We also note within the blog how there have been changes then to the academic year as different countries have reacted to the challenge. How do you educate a population when that population is required to lock down and isolate? And again, to reflect that at its peak, 91% of enrolled learners were locked out completely from their buildings and places of learning. This provides an indicator of the ways in which lockdown has affected school openings. And we can see at the peak, at the 1st of March, that near on 150 countries had completely closed their schools. And we can see the effect ever since as it's tapering out. But even still now, there are some countries in which schools are still closed. The areas that are shaded within the graph also show the exam periods that might be anticipated in different parts of the world. So evidently, during that first summer of the pandemic last year, there were a high number of schools that were completely closed during the examination periods. We've also provided information then on how different countries have responded, and it's notable about the many different ways in which countries have set up learning platforms, and we can see some of those on screen now. So many developed a range of national resources and platforms to encompass remote learning, and that includes online learning, and that inevitably then leads to discussions around the possibilities provided by blended learning, the ability to be able to study remotely, the ability to be able to study online, and also that option and that ability to be able to go in person. And we can see on screen some of the many different ways in which countries from India to Egypt and Burkina Faso have developed different platforms to ensure that pupils have access to a learning area. The changes to the ways in which students have been learning have presented some quality-based and practical challenges. I've listed a few of them here for consideration, rhetorical discussion. How has this affected the quality of delivery? How do we assure quality of online education, particularly in those countries where the developments have had to occur quickly? Are there countries where a policy has developed covering student entitlement during school closures? In some countries, even where the development of platforms has involved technology, this might pose fundamental practical issues to the end user who may or may not have access to appropriate technology, or even in some cases, access to electricity to power the technology they'd be using. And there are some instances as well where alternatives to online provision were sought, but there are many different challenges, I guess, which are still ongoing, but were particularly pertinent during that first major wave of the pandemic. UK NARIC, then, ECDIS, has presented also a number of different reports and studies. The one on screen on international secondary education is a special report which effectively consolidates the information that we provide within the blog. It looks at the different approaches to secondary assessment and the implications that the changes caused by the pandemic will have for admissions within the higher education context. This was first developed in May 2020, and we're now actually on to our third publication, which is online and available to members. And as we have hinted at, there have been a number of cancellations caused by the pandemic over the past year or so. Reflecting on 2021, we know that in the UK, that students at A level, that is the school leaving certificate at the age of 18, students were assessed on the basis of teacher assessment, so a centre assessed approach. We know that in India for the standard 12, again, the comparable point of learning for the schoolgoer, the 18 exit award, that all three All India boards and many state boards cancelled their exams completely, and therefore student achievement was based on continuous assessment. So we can see cancellations, changes, and new approaches categorized some of the approaches in 2021. This is also enshrined then within a further publication that we've produced, The Effects of COVID-19 on an International Secondary Assessment, which outlines different ways in which exams have been changed. The exam focus has been reduced, it has been refined, it has been altered. In some instances, face-to-face assessments were prevented. written exams only with no oral exams, for example, in Austria or Hungary and Poland last year. In some countries, there were a reduction in optional examinations, for example, in Estonia. Whatever the changes were, we've tried to capture these as much as possible within this series of reports on assessment. So the final point to bring up then is that if schooling has been affected, that's had a knock-on effect on assessment, and then inevitably this links with grading. So with the changes that have inevitably had to take place, this has given rise to the potential for differences in the distribution of performances of students for these adapted examinations for last year 2020 and this year 2021 in comparison with previous and subsequent years. This has led to a lot of discussion around fairness of assessment, and perhaps has given rise to a more fundamental consideration as to what we wish to achieve through assessment. And inevitably, with this effect, there has been impact felt by higher education admissions too. If more students are achieving higher grades because of the changes to the approaches to assessment, that places pressure on the system when more places are needed. It's given a number of different case studies, which I will pass through briefly, where we can see how methods for calculating grades changed last year and this year. So in France, there was teacher assessment in 2020, which led to an increased pass rate and also an increase in the highest grades. In the UK last year, in 2020, there were calculated grades, there were teacher assessed grades in the UK this year. And as we can see in the US, there was a switch to an online format in 2020, but in 2021, in-person and digital exams were offered. This leads me on then to the database I was mentioning earlier, International Grade Comparisons. And this ECDIS database provides a very accessible solution to understanding what is meant by grade meaning. And it does so by comparing the achievements at upper secondary level and undergraduate level qualifications in the UK, and compares those achievements to international qualifications serving the same function. It has over 140 countries included in the database, plus an extensive archive of data. We launched this database in 2013, and it has been updated annually ever since then. So it is an impressive set of data that helps guide admissions officers, governments, anybody, employers looking to establish a benchmark for understanding grade meaning. And it's on the basis of grade distribution. What do I mean by that? Well, essentially, how are the grades achieved in a given year for a given qualification distributed across the whole cohort of students? This helps us to contextualize and quantify what it means to achieve high and low grades. To conclude then, just some points for us to consider. UK ECDIS services have provided and continue to provide indicators of qualification recognition in line with our core remit and indicate levels of those qualifications. These have been developed and enhanced to not only help with some of the challenges posed by the pandemic, but also to focus on concepts such as student readiness and suitability. We can reflect over the last couple of years just how much the global pandemic has had a profound effect on education delivery, on student examination, and the assessment of performances. And I think in the 20 minutes or so I've been speaking, I've demonstrated how UK ENIC has tried as much as possible to shape its services and direct people to help continue and to understand what is happening and what to do with the qualifications that they receive. Assessment changes have affected grade performances, and that has resulted in a lot of discussion around the value of grades, and indeed on the perennial discussion point, certainly in the UK, around perceived grade inflation. Changes in the situation and the place of learning have also opened up questions on where is best for people to learn. Considerations of blended learning, should it be online? Can we include distance learning? This has been expedited by the pandemic. But what will happen in the future? Will this be a continuing trend, or will people wish to return face-to-face? There have also been challenges met by our institutions across the world inevitably, and we've seen evidence of institutions showing greater flexibility in how they handle applications from students. So certainly plenty of points to consider in terms of the impact of the pandemic and how centres such as UK ENIC can provide solutions, answers, discussions and advice around these. That's it from me in terms of the content from today's presentation. If you wish to stay in touch with me, please do send me an email or get in touch with me via Twitter. And if you're interested in any of the events that UK ENIC puts on, there's the training schedule ahead and newsletters that keep you informed of our work. I thank you so much for your time. And again, it's been a privilege to be here today. David.
Chris, I thank you for being so very clear about what is a very complicated and complex subject. And in fact, what you said lined up very nicely with what Tim Oates of Cambridge University was saying yesterday about the importance of examinations. We have run over time a little bit, but just one question, if I may.
Certainly.
You mentioned that a third of the organisations involved with UK ENIC were outside the United Kingdom. Are you able to say whether many of those come from the Arab world?
There are some. I don't know off the top of my head, I guess, which countries they come from, but I know we have members literally in every continent of the world, and every member will come to us with differing needs, differing challenges, and different purposes to understand the process of recognition better. Perhaps in some countries there is a drive to establish better processes for recognition, better processes for evaluating qualifications. There is such a diverse range of reasons why people come to us, and there are certainly countries within the Middle East that are within our membership base. But as I say, it really does cover all corners of the globe.
Yeah. I mean, what you are offering is hugely important for universities that have an internationalization strategy, and you have given them information, given them your details. I hope that they will follow up, and I thank you very much indeed for joining us today.
Thanks so much for your time, David. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. We should now have been hearing from Dr. Janice Gobert of Apprentice. Unfortunately, Janet has family issues, which means that she is not able to be with us. And so we're going to do something else instead, which is to take a presentation on the fourth industrial revolution. But I'm just having an issue with sharing. Here we go. Sharing the screen here. No. Let us try this. Right, we are there. The reason that we're doing this is a number of our speakers have mentioned the fourth industrial revolution. They've typically mentioned it in a sentence and then moved on, or they might have moved on just to mention one aspect of it. And as educators, I think it is important for us to understand the concept in full. Now, if you are short of time, the very best book on the topic that I have come across is one written by Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum, just simply called The Fourth Industrial Revolution. It's very accessible, and I have found it enormously useful. In the minutes available to me, what I will try to do is just to talk you through the elements of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, in particular focus on the role of universities. We'll look at the impact of COVID-19, and some of that impact is negative and some of it is positive. And then we'll move on to look at challenges and opportunities for universities. Now, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, the elements. Well, these are expressed in different ways by different authors, but these seem to me to be the key ones. I mean, first of all, it's disruptive. What's unique about it from the previous industrial revolutions is that it is a fusion of both new and existing technologies in the physical, digital, and biological realm. It's happening locally and internationally, and it's affecting all bits of society. It's happening quickly, and the pace at which it's happening is getting faster. And what we are witnessing and what universities are having to respond to is the changing job landscape. Some authors have called it a paradigm shift, others a turning point in human history. Now, if we take those general headings and look specifically, what do we find? A confluence of emerging technologies. What are they? Well, we've heard mention of artificial intelligence, robotics, and so on. And I'm not going to read the list out, but there is a list of those things which I think are being affected by the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And if we were sitting face to face, we would at this point have a brainstorm, and you would identify many more that are affecting you. But what skills are needed to cope with this change? Well, from some work done by Nesta, it seems that there are broadly three types: interpersonal skills, emotional, cultural intelligence; high-order cognitive skills, originality, fluency in ideas, and active learning; and system skills, the ability to recognize, understand, and act on interconnections and feedback loops. And it might be a good question to all of us to look at what we teach and the extent to which those three interrelated skills are developed in that role. If we look at our universities, what is the role of universities in the Fourth Industrial Revolution, or to help people prepare for it? Well, in a sense, the role of universities there is the same as it always has been. That is to develop research, develop the technologies, to understand their application, and to understand and prepare people for the consequences of them. And universities have been doing that throughout the ages. And then, of course, there's teaching and learning, preparing students, future employees, future citizens with critical thinking, scientific, entrepreneurial, creative, character building, values, and hard and soft skills that are useful both now and in the future. And then there's service to society. Now, some people would argue that's actually not a third category in its own right, that universities serve society through research and teaching. But I think there probably is a case for saying that this needs to be looked at in particular. And universities meeting local requirements, national requirements, and having an impact globally. And increasingly with the Millennium and now the Sustainable Development Goals, to do that in a way which is responsible and sustainable. Now, if we break that down a little bit, what should universities be doing, or how should they be doing it? Well, I would argue the first point is that universities should be engaging with society and doing so in a way that is aware of the fourth industrial revolution and what it involves. I think there is a role for universities to challenge societies, students, their staff, the profession, and themselves about whether what they are doing is most appropriate given what we are heading into. Through research, universities should keep ahead and arguably should be leading the changes, informing others and serving others. And then on the right-hand side, there's some more qualities: to advance knowledge, to innovate, to modernize pedagogy. We all learn in different ways. And we've heard during the course of this event that there are many online ways of learning which didn't exist a few years ago. And maybe universities should be looking at the way in which they teach to introduce additional elements or to update. But in doing that, it's important that they perpetuate values, the values of their society, and the culture of their society, which universities have done for hundreds of years. And they should do it in a way which maintains their integrity as a university, their academic freedom, their autonomy, and maintains their standards. Universities have been around for over 900 years, and they've achieved that because they have adapted. And I've got no doubt that universities will adapt again. So what about COVID? How has that had impact on universities? Well, as I indicated earlier, there are impacts which are negative. If students come together in universities, there is the risk of infection to students, staff, and the reputations of universities if COVID spreads in a big way in their premises. Social distancing has meant that people are not able to get together to learn in the way that they used to. It's been very challenging for university staff who've not been trained in the use of digital technology to overnight start to teach using those technologies. Some students who've not had to attend the university have struggled with the motivation to learn. We all get motivated in different ways, and sometimes it's a class of students which will bring students up to a higher level of motivation, and that's been missing. Maintaining quality assurance when students and staff are not in the same building, that's been a concern to some. The value of a degree and maintaining that degree is absolutely vital for the reputation of universities. And then we've heard various speakers yapping this morning, for instance, referring to assessments. How are they conducted? How can we maintain the integrity of those when students are not seen sitting in an examination room? And then the leaders of universities will rightly be concerned about the financial impact of COVID. Students not enrolling, for instance, because they don't want to learn until they can come back to the university. And then finally, we've seen in society what has become known as the digital divide. those who have sufficient connectivity and software and equipment to connect with their universities at a distance, and those that don't. And it's argued that the pandemic has in fact widened the digital divide. There have, however, been very positive implications of the COVID-19 situation. It has showcased the value of universities to society. Now, we have seen students coming together, producing protective equipment, giving that to society. We have seen students helping in their society. We have seen many ways in which universities have been able to engage with their society, which weren't in existence beforehand. We've also seen very clearly how quickly universities have responded and have developed vaccine and have been contributing to the understanding of the pandemic, how it is spreading, and so on. COVID has challenged historic conventions regarding pedagogy. Arguably, we've had the ability to teach online and to teach in an open way for many, many years, but we've not had to use it. And the pandemic forced us to use it, raising questions about the extent to which it could be used in the past, in the future. So it's accelerated the use of information technology in learning. It's accelerated blended learning, or BLIX, as it came out of the debate this morning. There is no doubt that it has prepared students for the digital skills necessary in the fourth industrial revolution workplace. Some would say that it's led to more cost-effective use of resources and more effective use of time. One very impressive seminar which I attended had a contributor from Bangladesh who very much welcomed not having to spend 3 hours in a car going to university and then back again because he had caring responsibilities at home. And that's been replicated across the world. In some ways, the pandemic has led to an easier engagement with stakeholders. You don't have to get people in the same room anymore. It is sufficient to do it online. And a number of universities have been able to continue to internationalize, but without needing to travel, and hence to do so more cost effectively. Now, what are the challenges for universities? Well, the first one, I think, is to understand what is happening and the implications of it. There's a lot happening, and it's happening very quickly. There are some threats, and there is competition from other providers. We see publishing houses putting out very good material, which may compete with that which universities would use. We see other companies coming into the space. Another challenge for universities is to develop a strategy to deal with this, to rethink, to engage with stakeholders, and then to be prepared to change and change quickly. Certainly, universities have to build staff capacity, the ability to teach online, and to prepare staff to do that. Funding is needed, and it may be necessary to restructure the university to focus on this. The curriculum may need reform. And I think we've seen from several of our speakers over the last day and a half that higher education is becoming demand, not supply driven. So challenging the traditional supremacy of the university and causing it to become an organization that serves its students in a different way. Attracting and supporting students, and be that through mental health provision or in the sort of ways that were being talked about this morning, becomes more value which universities can add. Also, as many of the jobs for which we are training students don't exist yet, universities need to think more in terms of lifelong learning rather than a 3-year injection in the arm. And to go with that, we need to improve our communications and the information, and we can continue to internationalize. Those are the challenges. What are the opportunities? Well, I think one of the opportunities is for universities to become an even more integral part of the knowledge society. They have demonstrated how they can respond when the pandemic struck. And so let's seize that moment and see what more can be done. In the context of this event, we've seen how universities are engaging with the visions of their countries. My question would be, are we engaging closely and extensively enough? Universities have the opportunity to develop modern capital. That's knowledge. That's human capital. That's about communications from which funds can be earned. Then to form new relationships with stakeholders for the benefits of all. We don't have so much time this afternoon, but there are in the Arab world a number of excellent examples where universities have engaged with local commercial providers to provide opportunities for students, many of them around building entrepreneurial skills. Universities have had the opportunity to form or to reform international partnerships and to continue to give their students an international experience, even though it's not been possible to travel very easily for the last couple of years. And that, I think, will serve to enhance the employability of students. Another phrase is doing the rounds, and that is smart universities. We have to become smart universities. If you unpack the term, what does it mean? Well, this is what I think it means, and I've drawn on a number of sources to put this together. That we do indeed have very powerful IT and communications infrastructure. That we're smart about how students are admitted. That we do that efficiently, we do it online. That we offer students a smart experience. In other words, it's an experience which is akin to that which they will have as they go into the fourth industrial revolution. But they start to experience that and become fluent with it in university. Smart governance. We've not spoken very much about governance in this event, but it is important. It's important for enabling society to have trust in the universities. And to do that, we need smart leadership. And looking at how the leaders of the future are trained is something which Arlene, one of the sponsors of this event, is doing. And Coursera, who we heard from yesterday, is helping us. Smart pedagogy, the way in which students learn, can be extended as part of smart university thinking. Digital content, blending digital content with the more traditional forms. Smart assessment. Is it actually necessary for students to sit for 3 hours in an examination hall to demonstrate that they have acquired the skills? Are there other options? And so we can go on, autonomous buildings, using smart technology to reduce the cost of providing the education that we do. Smart security, smart interaction with students. That is probably a whole topic for another conference. So let's, in the last few minutes, just try to share some conclusions. First of all, universities are big business, and I appreciate that a number of educators won't like me referring to it in those terms. But my point is this: if they respond well, they can play an even bigger part going into the fourth industrial revolution. If they don't respond well, then other organizations could come in and take over what they do, or at least some of what they do. Universities are amongst the longest surviving organizations because they've adapted, and they need to do so, and they can do so now. But that may require more radical action than has been experienced in the past. Universities can respond to COVID mindful of the fourth industrial revolution, which could give a speed and sustainability advantage. However, in making these changes, the values of a university are vital, whether they are values of autonomy and academic freedom, or whether they are more local values of service, for instance, and creativity. It is vital that all decisions are looked at against values to make sure that they comply. Modern leadership is essential. It's not easy, but we need to prepare the leaders of the future so that they can enable universities to do this. And universities need support. They need support from the state. They need to be enabled from the state. They need to be enabled by the organizations that employ their graduates, and so on. And all this needs to happen now. A final quote, and this is from the former president of the Magna Carta Observatory, following a review which he led in Poland. In his report, he wrote, "Instead of waiting and complaining, I see engagement and optimism." He noted a general attitude of, we can do what we want to do. And the question that I would leave with you is, do those quotes apply to your university? We might talk about the university, the body, as it is, but the body is actually made up of a very large number of very clever, talented, and committed staff, and it's in their hands to make this change. I hope that was helpful in unpacking a little bit the fourth industrial revolution and what it means. And I'm hoping now, indeed, it is just confirmed that we can go directly to Patrick Brothers, who is CEO or co-CEO and co-founder of Holland IQ. And Patrick, we look forward to you.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much. I'm going to set up my screen, so bear with me for one moment. How's that? Perfect. Wonderful. It's a pleasure to be with you all. My name is Patrick Brothers, as David mentioned, co-CEO of Holland IQ. Over the next 30 minutes, I'm going to share a very rapid presentation on strategic shifts and digital transformation in higher education around the world. We will be sharing this presentation with you, and I will be moving very quickly. I'd like to take this opportunity to cover as much ground as possible in this time, and then for you, as time permits, to really drill into the areas that are of most interest. There's also a lot of resources that are available that I will refer to throughout this presentation. Again, we'll make them available. So I'm apologizing in advance for going very quickly. Some of you will be uncomfortable at the pace we will move. We're going to cover a lot of ground. Firstly, we'll touch on digital transformation and what we're seeing around the world in higher education. I want to touch briefly on education technology, both what we're seeing globally and also in the Middle East and North Africa. We'll cover 4 strategic shifts in higher education before taking a very quick snapshot of a survey which many of you kindly responded to share some insights on how you are perceiving the current challenges, many of which David just talked about, and the opportunities for universities in the Middle East and North Africa. The responses are exclusively from universities in the region, so I'm looking forward to sharing those with you. For those of you new to Holland IQ, we're an impact intelligence platform based in New York, working in education, healthcare, and climate. We power decisions that really matter. We're very lucky to have some incredible customers from the World Bank, NGOs, sovereign wealth funds, the Gates Foundation, very large global technology firms, Apple, Amazon, Google, etc. Zoom, innovative universities such as Arizona State. You heard from Coursera yesterday. We're privileged to power them. 2U, Western Governors University, many higher education institutions around the world, for the most part, some of the leaders in innovation. You may have met some wonderful colleagues of mine that I wish I could share the stage with today virtually. I know they've been connecting with many senior higher education leaders throughout the Middle East. Maria Spies, my co-CEO, a lifelong leader in higher education, innovation and technology. Lucy, who leads our digital capability framework, you'll see shortly. And our academic in residence is Emeritus Professor Martin Bean. Many of you would know Martin as chairman and founder of FutureLearn. Some of you would know him as Vice Chancellor of the Open Universities UK, and most recently as Vice Chancellor of RMIT. We're very lucky to have Martin on the team, guiding us strategically and connecting us with other senior higher education leaders around the world. Let's talk about digital transformation. You've heard it, no doubt, throughout all of these presentations. The future of work looks different. Technology is allowing us to interact with students differently as well. Students have other options. David just mentioned moving from a supply side model to a demand-led model. COVID has driven change, and governments and ministries are rethinking policy and funding at the moment. We polled our global higher education network. This is about 2,000 higher education leaders around the world from over 80 countries. 83% of them expect significant disruption to universities before 2025. A quarter of them, digital is their top growth strategy. All of them report significant organizational challenges in driving that change, going from old ways of thinking to new ways of thinking. But the complexity of the task is recognized. Faculty readiness and skills are a very high priority, and transformation planning, if not underway, is high on the agenda. One of the first things that we did before COVID actually was we found many of our higher education and university customers and partners around the world were being force-fed a technology-led approach to digital transformation. You might see charts like this on the left-hand side, littered with technologies, the student nowhere to be seen. On the right-hand side, you'll see what we have open sourced as the Higher Education Digital Capability Framework. This is an open source framework built with our 2,000 strong higher education network around the world, moving from, on the left, demand and discovery, product strategy, marketing process, student recruitment and enrollment management, through learning design, curriculum, digital content and courseware, subject matter expertise and teaching strategies, through to the learner experience, academic administration, learner and academic experience, the student life, and assessment and verification, and then finally, work and lifelong skills, work integrated learning, career planning and placement, industry and business engagement, and alumni and continuing in education. And what you see underneath is about 70 capability blocks, which we've been promoting with universities around the world to focus on their core capabilities, to focus on the capabilities that will see them through this change successfully, and where they are thriving. One of the things we've been working on is a digital capability benchmarking study, which we would love to do throughout the Middle East as well, essentially working with groups of universities to help them self-assess and benchmark their digital capabilities, work out where they are strong and they need to protect and retain those capabilities, and where they are not as strong and they need to build them, they need to develop them, perhaps need to hire new talent or find partners in the market. We've conducted a number of case studies. This is all available at holoniq.com, or you can see that URL down the bottom, our higher education network. These are all open source case studies. Top left, Tec de Monterrey in Latin America. Top right, University of Rochester in the US. The University of Queensland in Australia, and recently Honoris United Universities working throughout Africa and the Middle East, which is very interesting. Let's touch on education technology, an area that is known to many of you, of course. I'm going to deep dive into what is happening to prime us for these strategic shifts. The chart that you see in front of you is venture capital investment, private growth investment by venture capitalists around the world in education technology. Since 2010, when it was about $500 million around the world, through to the end of Q3 2021, 3/4 of the way through this year, it was just shy of $15 billion US. You can see the incredible jump through COVID. It's precipitated incredible challenges in education, but it's also driven enormous opportunity for those in education technology, and investors around the world, unlike governments which are struggling to fund at the same levels that institutions have been used to, are fueling innovation with this funding. We've seen different stories play out around the world though. Top left, China rose incredibly fast, recording a record $10 billion of investment in 2020. But as this year, the government has made it very clear there are strong regulatory changes that have happened or are happening that have fundamentally changed the landscape of education technology and education in that market. The US on the right-hand side was slower than China more recently, but has exploded recently. That Q3 investment there is nearly double the prior year, and that's only 3/4 of the year. India is the next largest globally, experiencing a very strong investment cycle in education technology, and Europe, the fastest growing this year, growing more than 3 times the prior year to date. And we're not finished the year yet. The key message here is there is incredible investment fueling innovation in education technology. Venture capital is important. Even if you're a university, it's a lead indicator of the funding that is driving a lot of capability that we will see through the years to come. It takes time for these capabilities to build. In the Middle East, there is about 700 ed tech companies. They are either very small fledgling ideas or very fast-growing organizations. That chart down the left is how we cut education technology, and the top you won't be able to read is upskilling, then education resources, education management, language learning, testing. When we look at early childhood, we see investment, we see companies focusing on education resources in pre-K, games and simulation. In K-12, we see very broad innovation across resources, LMSs and SISs, tutoring, STEAM and coding, learning environments, very broad. Higher education, however, is not as popular from an education technology perspective. There's a small part in upskilling at the top there, and some small but important investments around higher education, but not as strong. Where we see the most innovation in the Middle East and North Africa is in the workforce and upskilling. This talks very specifically to the trends David was just talking about. Upskilling is that top chart. Education management, language learning for workforce, tutoring, capability development, talent acquisition. These are all very, very strong areas of education technology in the Middle East and North Africa. As a foundation, I'd like to now share 4 strategic shifts that we see in higher education around the world. We see this throughout the Middle East and North Africa as well. New credentials coming to the market, the education work nexus, borderless competition, and omni-channel learning. Let's dive into each one very briefly. New credentials. No doubt everybody here has heard of and talked about and is perhaps considering micro-credentials as part of their institution. In the background of this slide, you can see 3 sets of blocks, a blue set, a green set, and a red set. These are classic American degrees, the associate degree in blue, the bachelor's degree in green, which is typically 4,000 to 5,000 hours of classroom work, and master's degree on the right-hand side. The backdrop intended to communicate the size of these studies, courses of study. On top of that, you can see some of the micro-credentials that we see in the market. Google's certificates, no doubt you've heard of, are that small compared to a bachelor's degree. Google, as again, I'm sure you've followed, has said that it will treat its certificates equivalent to a 4-year degree. That's a significantly smaller footprint from a time investment and from a cost investment and from a speed investment as well. We are likely to see many students opt for courses such as this if it means that their employer won't differentiate that award from a standard university credential. We see these credentials in partnership with FutureLearn, with Coursera, with institutions such as eCornell and edX, of course, part of 2U now. A very interesting landscape to follow. Let's drill into some of those micro credentials. I'm sure you've heard of boot camps. Pre-COVID, these were 12-week residential programs designed to help people switch careers. They're now very strongly partnering with universities around the world and represent nearly $1 billion of investment by students around the world. You all know very well the online non-degree certificates and post-secondary micro-credentials. This excludes executive education, but again, is from many of the players that you have no doubt heard from or heard about: Coursera, Emeritus, FutureLearn, Get Smarter, Upgrad, 2U, and the like. We're seeing a real resurgence in professional certifications, not traditionally thought of as a competitor to universities. But again, now students can opt to study specifically for a certification, which again, an employer values very highly as it certifies their applied skills in an area, be that law, be that accounting, project management, technology, all forms. Professional certifications are a very interesting, potentially competitive form of credential for universities. And finally, online courses and badges. We're talking about, again, Coursera, Degreed, edX, Udemy, all of these players who are offering very small bite-sized courses. Again, this is very focused on the workforce, but there are still many undergrads who are using these programs to upskill themselves in specific areas where employers value those credentials as well. These new forms of credentials are set to play a very critical role, and they will reshape the post-secondary landscape. How quickly, to what extent, is yet to be seen. If you're not taking micro-credentials very seriously already, I recommend you do so, whether that be to investigate as part of your own institution or understand what the students in your cohorts are contemplating as well. The education work nexus, you've heard from David in the previous presentation, and again, you've seen in some of the analysis that we've shared so far, workforce is very strong. We're seeing a much stronger need to refresh and update skills throughout your career. There's demand for real world learning, which is often juxtaposed to academic environments. Companies are increasingly seeing educating their talent as a retention mechanism. So we're seeing specifically in the US, but in markets around the world where employers are partnering with universities to offer their employees postgraduate credentials for talent retention. That is an opportunity for universities. And finally, governments are very seriously looking at tertiary education systems. They want those programs delivered faster, cheaper. They want them to be more accessible to more diverse cohorts as well, and encouraging universities to take those steps. We're seeing great examples around the world where universities are fundamentally reimagining the design of their programs. One of our recent case studies of Wawasan Open Universities in Malaysia is very, very interesting. In brief, the students study for 1 year full-time and that's it. They then go out to a job in their second, third, and fourth year. Of course, they still study. They come back to the university to review fundamentals, but for the most part, the second, third, and fourth year is primarily in the workforce. That's still considered part of their course of study, but it's combining full-time work that is relevant to their chosen career path, other than what we see in most contexts, which is students will be working, but it's really got nothing to do with their future career other than an internship or apprenticeship they might do over a summer break. Let's touch on borderless competition. Previously, universities were competing for the most part with other universities in their province or state or regional area, perhaps with like ranked or peer universities in their country or maybe region. In the digital age, every university is a competitor, and not just universities, all of these other digital options. It is a very different market. One of the trends we're seeing globally that universities are responding to this is by partnering to move very quickly with organizations that have digital capabilities that are helping internationalize as well. These charts on the left is universities partnering with pathways organizations for international students, which again is highly digitizing versus the old model. We will still, of course, see many, many students studying on campus as international students, but this is being blended with digital as well. You can see here 53 partnerships, nearly double the prior year. Universities are opting for these partnerships. Bootcamp partnerships have risen the fastest out of all partnerships. This is universities establishing partnerships with bootcamp providers who run 10-week immersive programs for career switchers. It is not a degree program. It might be an on-ramp. It might be an off-ramp after a degree program. And then finally, online program managers who are partnering with universities to build, to deliver, and to recruit students for online programs specifically. We've seen incredible growth here as universities have opted to partner to move fast rather than to try and build a capability themselves internally. They've partnered with an organization that has a digital DNA, who's made online programs their business and their core capabilities, and they've teamed up essentially to take that to market. Incredible growth in this area. We've seen new forms of competition and collaboration. I heard David mention this in his presentation on the fourth industrial revolution as well. Top left, we've seen what you might call the mega institutions: Arizona State, Southern New Hampshire, Western Governors, large-scale organizations, IU in Germany, who are serving many more students than we ever contemplated a single university might through the digital domain. Top right, we're seeing some of the top private platforms and players, the Coursera's of this world, the Udemy's, who are reaching millions and millions and millions of students, delivering a very wide spectrum of programs. Bottom left, the large tech giants, they are playing a role here as well. We heard about Google certificates. Many of these players, AWS, have their own certifications. All of these players have an interest in building capability for their own talent, for their customers, and also for the ecosystem. And then finally, bottom right, we took this snapshot of a UK-based organization that's received a lot of funding, actually. I thought this strapline was very provocative. We're building an outstanding alternative to university and corporate training via professional apprenticeships. Quite confronting, very to the point and clear about how they are likely to play this game. Finally, of our strategic shifts, omni-channel learning, which is a reference to something we hear in the consumer and the market world of essentially being agnostic in some respects or serving many channels at once. We've seen online, hybrid, and I'll share with you a new model, if you've not heard of HighFlex, shaping this new market. Learners want choice. They want flexibility. We're in the age of the consumer. In higher education as well, like many industries, we must take heed of learner preferences. Online learning can provide new routes to market as well. There is an opportunity here. Again, David touched on this in his presentation. And we're seeing a very integrated approach to physical and digital in higher education around the world as well. What we see in front of us is what's being referred to in the market as HighFlex, and that is a combination of both hybrid and flexible. In this 12-week program, you see 3 students who have all chosen different modes for each week's course. One student has decided to do 3 weeks on campus, 1 week digitally, 1 week on-demand courses as well. This is a very, very challenging situation for some institutions who are challenged at just moving to digital for everybody, let alone giving students the option to pick their modality for the program to not just be hybrid of digital and physical, but also to be flexible to the students' requirements that suits their work situation, their home situation, their life situation, or just their preferences. I want to close out in the last 5 or so minutes with a preview of the survey that many of you so kindly completed in advance of this wonderful forum. We have asked universities around the world these same questions. I look forward to progressing this in 2022 and working with many of you to benchmark the state of play in higher education in the Middle East and North Africa. But let's walk through 3 of my favorite responses here from universities in the Middle East and North Africa. One of our questions was, what are the biggest challenges facing your institution right now? And of course, we provided responses for you to select from, and you could choose more than one. But digital adoption and transformation was selected as by nearly half of you as one of the biggest challenges. Student retention was also selected as very high, enabling or widening student access to education. Low student enrollments before it starts to progress down, still very high responses, changing workforce needs, budgets and funding cuts a little lower, student employability not so high, especially as we provided all of these responses were unfavorable regulation and policy, and student academic outcomes, which weren't thought of as bigger challenges as those that you see here at the top. A really fascinating reflection of the priorities of institutions in the Middle East and North Africa. The second question we flipped a little, which was focused more on digital trends. And we asked you to select which digital trends you thought would have the most impact on the future success of your institution. And 80% of you chose hybrid learning as one of those digital trends that you think will impact the success of your institution. Personalized and adaptive learning was also very highly responded. And this speaks to those high flex models that we just walked through of hybrid learning and personalized learning for the learner as well. Interestingly, AI and automation, data and analytics, VR, AR, and simulation were in the next 3 blocks, all very focused on advanced technology and data before micro-credentials, and then OPMs, MOOCs, and boot camps, which were not thought of as trends that were going to be as important to the impact and the future success of your institution as those at the top, which makes sense. And the final question I'm sharing today as part of a preview to these were the top barriers that you felt you were experiencing on your journey to improving digital and online learning at your institution. And we see this all around the world, but many of you thought that the top barrier was teacher capability and training. It wasn't so much about the technology. It wasn't so much about the processes. It was about your teachers. It was about your faculty. It was about their digital literacy, their digital capabilities, the opportunity to train them on these new tools and teaching in a completely different environment, not just in a digital way, but in this high flex, very flexible way. Culture and change management was the next largest. Some are reluctant to share this point, but it's shared by many who I speak to around the world, that one of the top barriers is the resistance to change. It's explaining the incentive to change. It's culture. Universities have obviously been around for many, many years. They're some of the oldest institutions in the world, and in that respect, perhaps it's not a surprise that cultural change is more difficult than it might be otherwise. Picking the appropriate technology solution was also up there as number 3, as one of the top barriers to improving digital and online learning at your institution. That ends the presentation that I've prepared for you today. David, thank you so much for the opportunity to share those. Again, I apologize for moving so quickly, but I'll make sure to make this presentation available for you all to read in your own time.
Well, Patrick, I want to thank you, and I want to thank you in particular for undertaking that piece of research. Quite often people sit around and think this is an issue or that's an issue and so on. But what we should be doing in the education sector is we should be researching it.
Indeed.
We should be getting to the truth, and you have done that for this forum, and we are very grateful to you.
Thank you,
another body that will be very grateful to you is the Association of Arab Universities, because you may have seen in the information about this that one of the reasons for this event is to inform the submission which they make to the UNESCO Global Forum next May. And there are people working behind the scenes that are noting what is happening during these sessions, and it will be their task to prepare at least the first draft of that report. So your research will have currency there, and I hope that we may be able to do some kind of press release or something which will share that learning, because you actually you don't underline, that's too trivial. You provide foundations for a lot of what people have been saying with the research that you have done. You also, I think, point to some really key agendas. The capability of staff being the biggest issue. And really, you know, it seems that we need to go up a gear or 2 or 3 in doing that if the sector is going to respond to the challenges which both you and I, in our different presentations, prepared for different reasons, have pointed out. The combination of hybrid and flexible, if one adds in the need to assure standards and becomes something which is essential, but very difficult to do.
I agree. Definitely.
So if colleagues on the forum have any questions, you have an opportunity to put them now in the chat. Otherwise, I don't think this is the last time that we're going to be engaging with you, Patrick.
Thank you.
In various ways, you have complemented so nicely many things which other colleagues have brought to this forum. You've given a perspective of it.
It's wonderful.
Put in very, very sharp focus some of the threats and the opportunities which universities have. So, thank you, Patrick. Thank you so much for all that you have done for the forum. Thank you for agreeing to share that presentation. And I shall look forward to working with you again at some stage in the future. Not too distant.
Thank you so much, David. Pleasure to be with you all, and best of luck for the rest of the conference. And thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, this morning in the UK time, we had technical difficulties with the sound of the presentation from the Minister of Higher Education and Scientific Research from Mauritania. We think these have been resolved. And so may I introduce Her Excellency, Dr. Amal Sidi Mohammed Al-Sheikh, who is going to speak on the theme of digital transformation of the higher education sector in the time of Corona.
الرحمن الرحيم. السيد الأمين العام لاتحاد جامعات العربية، السادة الوزراء، بالبداية لا يسعني إلا أن أعبر لكم سعادة الأمين العام عن خالص الشكر والصادق الامتنان على الدعوة الكريمة التي تقدمتم بها إلي من أجل مخاطبة منتدى التحول الرقمي لقطاع التعليم في زمن كورونا، الذي أتمنى له النجاح وتحقيق ما تصبو إليه سعادتكم من وراء تنظيمه. كما أزف تحياتي الأخوية إلى كافة المشاركين بهذه التظاهرة التي لا تمكن أهميتها بطبيعة موضوعها فحسب، بل أيضاً في الآفاق التي ستفتحها العروض والنقاشات على فرص استفادة التعليم في دولنا العربية من التحول الرقمي. سيد الأمين العام، لقد شكلت جائحة كوفيد-19 أكبر تحدي واجهته البشرية منذ عدة عقود، وكان للتعليم نصيبه الكبير من تداعياته السلبية نظراً لارتباطه الوثيق بالتقارب الاجتماعي وتجمعات الأشخاص التي كان تجنبها على رأس الإجراءات الاحترازية لحد من انتشار الوباء، وأدى ذلك إلى إغلاق مؤسسات التعليم لفترات طويلة بعدة مناطق من العالم وفي موريتانيا طبعاً، رغم أن الحالات الأولى من الإصابة بالمرض ظهرت متأخرة نسبياً عندنا، وأن موجات الجائحة الثلاث التي تم تسجيلها بقيت ولله الحمد دائماً تحت السيطرة. وقد مكن تأخر ظهور الفيروس في بلادنا من استباق تداعياته على مستوى المنظومة التربوية عموماً وعلى مستوى التعليم العالي خاصة، حيث تم الشروع في وضع حلول البديلة للتعليم الحضوري منذ الفصل الأول من السنة الجامعية 2020-2021. وهكذا تم تسخير منصتي جوجل ومايكروسوفت 365 للتعليم عن بعد من طرف العديد من مؤسسات التعليم العالي الموريتانية، على رأسها جامعة نواكشوط العصرية بمختلف كلياتها، والمعهد الجامعي المهني التابع لها، والمدرسة العليا المتعددة التقنيات، والمعاهد التابعة لها. وتم أيضا تنظيم دروس عن بعد عن طريق وسائط أخرى كالواتساب والإيميل، وكانت النتيجة أنه جرت المراقبات البصرية ومراقبات الاستدراك بظروف مرضية، وذلك فور تراجع الموجة الأولى من الجائحة والسماح باستئناف الدراسة. السيد الأمين العام، هناك درس تم استخلاصه من آثار الجائحة على العالم، مفاده أنه أصبح من الضروري وضع استراتيجية محكمة لإدخال التعليم الإلكتروني والتعليم عن بعد في نظام التدريس، وإدخال الإجراءات القانونية والتربوية اللازمة لذلك. وتعمل وزارة التعليم العالي والبحث العلمي على تحيين النصوص المنظومة لنظام ومسارات الدراسة والتقييم ومنح الشهادات في ذلك الاتجاه. ويعلق قطاعنا آمالا كبيرة على نتائج منتداكم الناجح إن شاء الله، وستصدر التعليمات لكافة مؤسسات التعليم العالي والبحث العلمي من أجل الاستفادة منها بالرفع من مستوى التعليم الرقمي والتدريس عن بعد داخلها. مرة أخرى أجدد لكم الشكر على الدعوة، وأتمنى النجاح لأعمال المنتدى التحول الرقمي لقطاع التعليم في زمن كورونا. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.
Your Excellency, thank you very much indeed for that. Some of the things said by Her Excellency just underline the importance of this forum at this time. We'll take a short break now. We'll return at the top of the hour, and I hope that you will join us again then.